All right, guys, so this one's going to be an interesting video. I just got done filming a different talking point that, was a bit more, I guess you could say, cut and dry, or let's say less nuance to it. This one's going to have a lot of nuance, and in the end, both answers are correct, and both answers can be wrong at the same time. Maybe not wrong, maybe that's not right, but maybe you could say not the best application, which is kind of what my channel is all about, is application of tools and equipment. This will be an interesting thing to get people thinking. And I would encourage you to leave comments based on your preferences and what you kind of think about what I'm going to say in the rest of this video. Because I'm going to kind of throw out a few opinions on my part, and I'm going to throw out a few more subjective pros and cons, which hopefully keeps the whole thing a little unbiased. But I personally use both these tools in this application a lot, and I have different things that I prefer to use for different reasons. And so I'm just kind of interested to see what the rest of the YouTube world thinks about this. Maybe it can help lead to some sort of standard for instruction also. So if you're a professional out there, I definitely would like to hear your opinion on this and what you teach people in the region that you work. So people that teach on the East Coast are probably going to have way different opinions about this than people that teach on the West Coast. And it'll definitely depend on your different skills. For example, if you're more of an ice climber, if you're out there ice guiding all the time, or if you're out there in Joshua Tree rock guiding all the time. So those will have two different opinions based on this same thing that we as guides and as recreationalists do quite a bit. But it's not the actual act of doing it, it's just the application of a single tool, which is invaluable in actually accomplishing the task. So I guess with that rambliness, let's get into talking about a little bit of thoughts about belaying with a Grigri on the anchor versus an ATC on the anchor, or I should say more of a guide style belay device. And this is going to be mostly within the context of which one should we teach people when they're learning how to do it. That's where the comments are great, because those of you who learned from hopefully a professional in the past, like let's say 10 years or so, how to do this thing, it'd be interesting to see what they taught you. And then those of you who teach other people, it would be nice to see what you kind of go to. And I'm going to start this off with saying that I have worked with plenty of other clients who want to learn some maybe more advanced skills or push their climbing a bit higher than just a small multi-pitch. And they've learned from other people about their belay style off of the anchor. And they've learned from people that I know and respect. They're really good colleagues. And they've also learned from people that I've never met before, but I'm sure they're still totally solid. But it's just sort of like seeing like the people that I know, and I know kind of their experience and their training, and I'm kind of like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense why they would kind of go give you this tool versus some other tool. And then on top of that, I've also taught plenty of people from ground level, or like from basically no training as their first exposure to actual training. And then I kind of have my system that I teach them first, and then we can move on. In the end, I like showing people how to use both of the tools, the Grigri and the ATC. Some people only decide to choose to show them one or the other. And I think that's where the main problem is like only showing them one or the other device. And I think if you're going to show one of them, it's okay. But if you're only going to show one of the other, it may not be so okay. So let's move right on. Let's start with what I teach people on belaying in the multi-pitch world. Starts with clove hitching into the anchor, or attaching yourself to the anchor, whatever. And then the first thing that I show people is the guide mode device. And I tell them about clipping it to the anchor, I tell them about loading it, climber's side on this and that. And then this is what we use for the first it depends on how long I'm working with them, but if it's like, say, a 2-day kind of intro to multi-pitch type course, this is what we use for at least the first day, day and a half as the main device. So why do I default to that ATC in guide mode? There's a number of reasons. One is kind of from the start when I learned this stuff, this is where it gets into my bias. This was kind of like the thing that we used, and the Grigri on the anchor wasn't really super in vogue yet. It was just sort of being introduced to the world by the AMGA. And back then, and only till relatively recently, it wasn't even recommended by the company to use the Grigri in a direct belay off the anchor like that. So this was kind of the standard, and it really still is. That's like my bias as in I don't have that's not a real reason why. That's more of just an opinion and a familiarity piece. But thinking about it a bit deeper, you can argue that this device is a bit more foolproof than the Grigri. And foolproof is a bad word. I'm not even sure what word I should use, but you could think about it in terms of if you load it correctly, and you're not paying attention to the brake strand, not as much rope will slip back through. Another thing that's really important is if you load this and then it gets grinded up against a wall, you don't have to think about what side you're going to put the handle on in order for the Grigri to have maximum predictability. So this is a really good standard setup. And if you think about it also logically in learning progression, and this is actually changed now, but it used to be that when we were learning to belay, we would start with the ATC as a baseline, and then we would move on to something like a Grigri as the next step, or maybe even the third or fourth step, after we're competent with the ATC and really understand the mechanics that go behind catching climbing falls. So if we start with ATCs in top rope belaying, why not start with ATCs in multi-pitch belaying? Just so that way we covered a base and we have this extra knowledge of a really versatile tool. The Grigri, on the other hand, is less versatile. I mean, we all know that. And it has just a few extra nuances to it, which if you're just learning how to build anchors and, you're learning new knots and like all this other stuff, maybe adding in like, oh, you got to make sure this can float freely, and like, now you gotta, if they're not familiar with this device, then, you gotta learn to load a new thing. You gotta be so much more on top of it in order for the Grigri to provide a good top rope belay. Should we really be going straight away to this device, learning how to use this off of the anchor, and just skipping the ATC and guide mode altogether? That's ultimately what I'm getting at here is, I've worked with people where they've worked with another guide that I may have known or may don't know, and they say, oh, we didn't really use the ATC in guide mode, we just went straight to the Grigri. Been thinking about it for the past number of years, I guess, like, kind of like where would that ideal come from? And a big part of it could be that guide's or instructor's training level. Because if nowadays, you can't really sneeze at a crag without running into someone who's an SPI of some sort, gone through the course, gone through the exam, working SPI, done multiple research, they're all over the place. And a huge part of the SPI curriculum is based off of using this device in this application. SPIs often don't even cover the idea of using ATC in guide mode because it can be the Grigri in this application is super effective, a top managed site environment in the SPI, like single pitch guiding application. And so since this device is really effective and helps streamline a few systems, that's where it's like that becomes the focus of the SPI course, which then, just after you take that thing, you're kind of more focused on the curriculum that you got taught in that, and then you can fixate on that until you move into a higher level course like the Rock Guide or whatever. New instructors coming out of that course may be favoring this sort of setup over a different one based on the feedback that they get in the course And so that's kind of leading to quite a bit of popularity. I think another thing that's really tough is people that show up to these multi-pitch courses, they own their own equipment. And almost always I've had clients show up with ropes that are really fat. Like, actually not even really fat, like 9.5 and up. And it's not their fault that they don't have the pairing of the equipment that well. If you show up with a really big rope and a really small device, especially in guide mode, and especially if that device is really new, it's going to have a ton of friction. That's it, like bottom line. You know, helping them out with pairing their device to their equipment really helps. This is my main rope that I use in a lot of applications, especially in Alpine. This is the Mammut Alpine Sender 8.7 mil. And so this rope works great in a device in guide mode, like this Petzl Reverso. I pair these things up all the time, and I don't really get any elbow pain, especially since this Reverso is broken in just the way I prefer it to be. So I have the least amount of friction in this setup. I've been finding more devices that work for fatter ropes. Obviously GG's work, so you could use that as their original exposure. And then the BL Air Force 3. That is also a super wide device, works really great with fat ropes. So if you can kind of help coach your clients through pairing the devices together, it helps out with their elbows straining under like this really fat rope. But there are also times where, you know, it's like they show up with just like a 10 mil rope, and really no device on the market in guide mode is going to feel good with that 10 mil rope, or at least not nearly as good as with a Grigri. So then coaching them on the Grigri and the uses with that, and using a Grigri Plus in top rope mode. You know, this is why people hire guides, is because of that intricate understanding of how all this stuff goes together. And so, and it's the experience with all those different things. That's why people really want and get out of the expert knowledge that we can provide. The equipment part is just a small piece as to why we're kind of moving from Grigri to ATC. But there are still plenty of times where it's like, my go-to while multi-pitch climbing is really ATCs in guide mode. And I like worn out ones where the teeth are worn out, but it's my go-to because of those pairings. Like I can have a nice 9.2 like supple rope that I use while rock climbing and rock guiding, and I can put those all in the ATC, and I can pair it up with the right device and the right carabiner on the ATC, and it doesn't hurt as bad as the Grigri. And so therefore I don't really need to have this extra piece of equipment in that application, which could be kind of a crutch to still have an effective day. All that is to say, again, I'm also forced with my biases right now where I'm in the Alpine so much and on these bigger routes where I'd rather have an ATC, and I don't even bring a Grigri because I want the versatility of the device. And so because of that, I've also morphed a lot of my equipment selection into making that ATC work on everything I want it to, especially regarding my ropes. So that's a bias right there. Someone who's just doing single pitch rock work all the time will have a different bias because they're so used to working with fatter ropes, and then that way their go-to would be the Grigri. So they're used to these top managed sites where they're lowering people down and bringing people up, and belaying just in general, top rope anchors. So Grigris are what they live and die by. And for me, it's more of an ATC is what I live and die by. So that's the ultimate biases in there. And then that's also what plays into when you hire a guide is regional bias and experiential bias as well. And then also like just what works better in environments. You know, the Grigris work great in rock environments, but they don't really work well in ice environments. So in the ice world, you see a lot more ATC use. You see a lot more of the camming assisted function where the whole device moves in order to cam on the rope versus like this inside bellow type thing. So that's a bit of a nuance that you would learn if you went to Michigan Ice Fest and took a class on belaying. Most ice guides, unless they work in really dry environments, are not going to be using these things. all that kind of plays into pros and cons too. So we know that my go-to is the ATC. In the Alpine, ski guiding, like technical ski guiding with like ropes and stuff, or technical ski mountaineering ropes, ATCs on glaciers, that's ATCs. And then really it's in the rock world with my fatter ropes. That's when I start using Grigris in this belay from above mode. Of course, there are other things that are worth considering. Like another reason why we use the Grigri in more SPI terrain is because if we do have to do raises in like a 3-to-1 or higher, then the Grigri is it's quite a bit more efficient and less work to haul with than an ATC in guide mode. They both work, but if you go out and try it, compare the two, the Grigri is way easier than the guide mode, and actually way more efficient too. So that is the nice part. Again, the Grigri is kind of a nicer all-in-one tool. You do have to worry about it locking. You do have to be more mindful of the brake hand because a lot more rope can slide through on the climber's side, unless you have a Grigri Plus. And if you have fat ropes, then a Grigri is great. Or if your elbows just hurt that day, then a Grigri can be great. I don't think it should be the one-stop shop that we do. I think if you carry a Grigri in multi-pitch terrain, you should have an ATC with you in multi-pitch terrain. And we're seeing more and more accidents nowadays on longer routes, or I guess more rescues on longer routes because people don't really understand the nuances between the two devices. That at least plays a part into it. Another part would be not prepping at all and not having the proper skills you need to actually climb these things. This little thing, ATC, can do a lot. It's a very versatile tool, and if you're not bringing this on a climb, you better have a good reason why you're not bringing it on a climb. It's a good emergency piece. When I'm out rock guiding, I always have at least 2 devices on me, which are usually a Grigri and an ATC. And I use them for different things or different needs. My rock rescue thing that I did where my buddy broke his arm and stuff like that, I actually used my ATC and my Grigri to perform that rescue in order to get us the 5 pitches or whatever back down to the ground. So they come in handy, and you should have both of them. And I think you can have your go-to, like the Grigri is my go-to for this, the ATC is my go-to for that. That's totally okay. I just think that you should have a good reason for it. And I think you shouldn't be afraid to switch from one to the other. If you do have a really fat rope, all the anchors are really nice, you can use a Grigri, no problem. And maybe that's all that's worth saying about this one right now. I'm just throwing this out there into cyberspace. I want to see what you guys have your opinions on. So leave a comment if you do have one. And it'd be kind of interesting to read to see what people's go-to is, the reasons behind it. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. I got my bolt. This is my bolt. Backed up to the anchor, but that's pitch 7 right there.
Yeah, buddy.
Making progress now. Made it to the high point from yesterday. Now we're actually going up.
Upward.